And welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Dave Lindorff. Dave is an investigative journalist, a contributor to The Nation, also the author of several books, including The Case for Impeachment, and the founder of thiscan'tbehappening.net. This particular article you can find at The Nation. Are toxic coastal landfills going to kill us all? I mean, this is pretty alarming stuff. Dave, welcome back to the program. How many landfills are there in the United States, and how many of them are near our coasts, and why should we worry about that?
The best estimate comes from some decade or so ago from the EPA, which has paid very little attention to them, that there are 100,000 landfills in the country, and that half of them, approximately, so 50,000, lie in the 30-odd counties that border one of the nation's coasts.
That would include rivers, or just ocean coasts? No,
that's just coastlines, Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific, and Hawaii and Alaska are on the Pacific, so they're included. These are all landfills that are within 10 feet, within 10-foot sea level of the ocean. That's kind of the defining of being on the coast.
So the assumption is then that if global warming caused sea level rise, and the sea level is rising, but it's just been a few centimeters in the last few years, but if that starts becoming inches and then feet, that these landfills will be infiltrated with water, that the toxic waste in them will spread to other places, that it'll poison. I mean, what's the outcome?
Well, the initial thing that will happen is that the bottoms will be infiltrated, because most of these landfills, all but a few thousand of them, are legacy landfills that never had liners on the bottom. They just were the way, people would dig a trench or have a gravel pit or something, and they'd just start filling it up. Or later, they started piling them on the coast. They've always been piled up on the land, because if you dig down a foot or two, you're in water. So the first thing that will happen is you'll have salt infiltration into the bottoms, which can lift them up or destroy any kind of pumping systems they have to try to keep them dry. But later, the worst problems are going to be surface water coming in, so that these mounds of garbage will become islands of garbage, and then they get wrecked by the waves, and the dirt comes off. The plastic tops get destroyed if they're there, and they all end up in the water, in coastal waters that are very important and vulnerable.
We're not talking about being concerned about a 1925 refrigerator floating out to sea here. This is much more than that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything went into these dumps historically. These are dumps that can go back 150 years, and every county has them, multiple of them. And some towns had, many landfills. They'd use up one, they'd start another and bury the first one, forget where it was, maybe. And the thing is that when America was more industrialized, you had companies everywhere doing chemical work, doing, work that involved oil solvents, paints, everything. And it all went into the dump. They didn't have any rules about what could go in a dump. That started in the 1980s, that the federal government started putting restrictions on what could go in a landfill. One of the few rules they've made about landfills. So we don't even know. Nobody had to log what they put in. If you had chemical companies or companies that used chemicals in your community, that company just drove trucks up and dumped it into the dump.
Wow. So what do we do about this, Dave?
Well, the best thing to do, and what Hank Wanless, the expert on sea level rise at University of Miami, told me is the only real solution, is to move these things before they're inundated, because it'll be real expensive to move them after the water starts surrounding them. And that's a huge job. I mean, I've heard estimates of about $1 trillion to move them all the vulnerable ones. Although that's over maybe a period of 20 to 30 years if you triage it right and move the ones that need to be moved first, and so it isn't as much money as it sounds like.
And if this doesn't get done, and I'm guessing in all probability it won't, I mean, you know, if we're talking climate change remediation, I think that they're going to be putting money into moving buildings and people long before they put it into moving landfills. If this doesn't happen, it's going to what? Poison the oceans? Is that the concern? I mean, we were dumping this stuff in the oceans for a long time, too.
You know, the ocean's pretty big. I don't think that's the major problem. The problem is that the wetlands get poisoned, and they're already being, they're extremely vulnerable because they're starting to get red tides and all of that from the increased heat. And the thing about wetlands is that aside from the fact that people live in them and that they feed the water table for, you know, people to get drinking water and stuff, they also are where about 70% of the sea life in the ocean have some part of their breeding cycle. They either lay their eggs there or they function as nurseries so that the young of whatever, you know, species you're talking about, from clams and shellfish to, you know, major fish and turtles and all of that, have to have that. You know, they either have to grow up there, they either breed there, they swim through and go upriver like salmon and eels and shad, or most of them just have their young there, lay their eggs, and then the young grow up, you know, through one summer or one year, and then they swim out to sea.
Yeah. Now, you're talking about the United States. The study that I saw in this article that you wrote for The Nation, and we're talking with Dave Lindorff, who's got this new piece in The Nation, the investigative journalist and contributor to The Nation, titled "Toxic Coastal Landfills: Are They Going to Kill Us All Off?" You cited a study in Great Britain. I mean, this is happening literally all over the world, and I would think that it's particularly bad in low-lying island nations. You know, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, like that. Is there any? Is the IPC? Well, maybe it's not the IPCC's charge. Is the UN looking at this? I mean, is anybody taking this seriously?
Nobody's taking it seriously. I mean, the problem with the international picture, which is more, in some ways, more horrible than the U.S., is that we and Europe are dumping our garbage in coastal communities in places like Ghana and, you know, Cameroon and stuff that it's right on the water, and so we're contributing to all of that. In the Philippines and Indonesia, as you mentioned, the third world countries are happy to take the garbage. Some of them, and it used to be China, they stopped. But you know, it's a source of income for them, and it's cheaper for us to ship that stuff there than to use a landfill.
So the message for the people who are listening or watching the program, other than holy crap, there's another one, is what? We raise this with our elected officials? Is there something to point to? Is there a group that's working on this?
Well, there aren't any groups. When I did this story, everybody said, "Whoa, I didn't think of that." You know, even coastal defense groups said, "Whoa, we didn't think about the landfills." It's incredible, and it's not seen as sometimes if they'd see it in their dump, they didn't see it in the larger picture. You know, so I think the first thing that has to be done, and the EPA actually recognized it, and I have a quote in the piece from the EPA saying, in writing, they would only see me in writing, and they said, you know, we realize this is serious. We realize that something needs to be done about it, and we realize there should be a study to log where all these landfills are and what's in them. But then they said, the EPA has no plans to do a study. And I'm thinking, what?
Well, it's probably because they have no resources.
Well, yeah, but that's really, now that shouldn't be true. And that's a cheap thing to do, and find out what the risks are and what's in these dumps.
So encourage your elected officials to encourage the EPA to do a study about the dumps, the landfills all around our coasts.